There are a ton of media shows, newsletters, segments out there. WNYC is great on the media, Brian Stelter's reliable sources, on and on. We thought we here at Boston Public Radio would jump on the bandwagon, inspired by Emily Rooney and the great Beat the Press, and also a tribute to our executive producer, Jamie's professor and mentor, the late, incredible New York Times media critic, David Carr. It is time for what Carr called Press Play on Boston Public Radio. Our hope is we'll do it weekly at 1 o'clock on Fridays. With us to kick it off are two familiar faces. GBH's Callie Crossley, host of Under the Radar with Callie Crossley, which you can catch Sundays right here on 89.7 at 6 o'clock. You can also hear Callie commentaries on Mondays for GBH's Morning Edition. She's co-host of GBH's The Culture Show. That airs daily at 2 right here on 89.7, including today's Week in Review live right on this set here at the library. Hey, Callie.
Hello.
Also here, GBH politics reporter Adam Reilly, previously the host of GBH2's Talking Politics. Adam, it's great to have you. Thanks for joining us. We appreciate it.
So, you know, when Trump was elected the first time, he always called us, we in the press, Emily the People, and said we were all making up all this fake news and all this. But really, it's kind of accelerated to, 100 miles an hour now. And Callie, how is the press responding to all this?
Well, I have before me just sheafs of paper, 5 and 6 and 7 stories of what I would say uncomfortable and challenging interaction with the Trump administration and sometimes with President Trump himself. So you could just pick one. It's really tough going right now. I think what you're asking, though, is on our side, sometimes we don't seem to be standing up in the way that we have in the past, and that's concerning.
Yeah.
And there are some, big examples out there now, and it makes a lot of us in the business nervous about it.
Can I pick one example?
Sure.
Let's talk about that for a minute. Associated Press reporter and photographer barred from press conferences in the Oval Office and on the plane because they had the audacity to not agree on their style book to call it the Gulf of America. They're still calling it the Gulf of Mexico. A bunch of people, including, I didn't know this till this morning, including Newsmax and Fox News, signed on to a letter saying this is not right, it cannot stand. However, I'd forgotten this. Last week, earlier this week, we were talking to Chuck Todd, and we were saying to him, when a situation like this arose a bunch of years ago during the Obama administration, when Fox News was barred from interviews with Ken Feinberg, the brilliant compensation czar, NBC, and he interrupted us and he said, I was the guy from NBC. NBC, CBS, ABC, and CNN refused to participate in press conferences. That's real action, not like we're doing now. What's your take on
You totally stole my thunder.
Well, go
I was
ahead,
getting
go
all
ahead.
worked
both
up
our
about
thunder.
that when I was driving over. No,
Yeah.
I completely agree with you. It's all well and good to sign a strongly worded letter expressing your dismay at AP being frozen out, but I really think it's past that point now. What we should see news organizations doing is saying, okay, they've been denied access. They are a classic, credible, nonpartisan
AP. Yeah.
AP news organization. We're not going to take our seat if you're not going to let them take their seat. No one wants to do that because everyone's afraid of what the reaction is going to be. By the way, AP does call it the Gulf of America. They just primarily call it the Gulf of Mexico, while also noting that the president has rebranded it. And their rationale is it's been called the Gulf of Mexico for 400 years. He's the only one who's calling it the Gulf of America. We cater to an international audience.
So why are they, before we get to Callie on this, why are they not doing what these major outlets did when Obama barred a reporter from his press conferences?
My theory would be, if you imagine the fear of what the response could be, think about what that fear was under Obama. Now think about what that fear is under Trump. Completely different.
What are they going to do?
They're terrified.
Would you agree, by the way, that the other reporters should refuse to go?
Oh, absolutely. And we were both going to bring up that Obama moment, that President Obama moment, when everybody sort of stood firm. But I guess in the wake of this, in the context, in the larger context, other things that are happening that maybe encourage other folks to be fearful. For example, all of those traditional media outlets that you've heard we named here have been told, get out of your spaces that have been there for you in the White House forever and ever and a day. We're going to replace them with all these other outlets with an avowed bias, I don't even want to use the word conservative because there's something else going on for a lot of these outlets. And so they're going to take their places. That's one thing. As we saw, ABC decided not to go to court over something that most analysts, legal analysts and others, believe they could have won. Why? We don't know. They paid $15 million.
This is when Stephanopoulos
Yes.
called it rape rather than sexual
Yeah.
assault.
Right.
Yeah.
And at the moment, CBS is now under pressure, 2 lawsuits. The president increased the amount that he was asking for from 10 billion to
Yeah, I wanted to say
20.
billion.
I want to say billion, but it might be million to 20 million because he's angry about how he was treated during his run, but also the Kamala Harris interview, which they insist was edited in favor of her.
They,
And
the
that-
Trump people,
They, the
yeah.
Trump people, and that somehow CBS was on her
You
side.
were
So
say-
yeah, I was just going to
Yeah,
say, you think
yeah.
about the range
Yeah.
of threats.
Yeah.
You know, you could be denied access to if you make that show
Yeah.
of support.
Mm-hmm.
You might face litigation. You might face investigation by the federal
Mm-hmm.
government, like PBS and NPR are facing for alleged bias. Right?
Yes.
That's Marjorie Taylor Greene. She wants the first DOJ subcommittee hearing to be on bias
Yeah,
at
the-
our network affiliates.
Right.
The space laser, Jewish space laser lady is talking about other people's and making mistakes and being biased. I want to mention Elon Musk, though. I mean, he is gone. He's Mr. Free Speech, isn't this his claim to fame?
Yes.
Free
Yeah,
speech.
that's the idea,
Obviously
right.
now he's no more free speech if it's not speech he doesn't like. So he talked about his fantasy of a long prison sentence for 60 Minutes reporters because he didn't like this piece about him that ran last week. He talked about a Wall Street Journal reporter who broke the news about the Doge staff person, the one that said all the racist remarks and how let's embrace Indian hatred, and he was a racist before it was fashionable, and all this kind of stuff. I'm paraphrasing, but that was essentially what he said. Musk said that reporter should be fired immediately. And Radio Free Europe should be shut down, talking about how it's all full of these radical, crazy left
Crazy
people were the
lefties,
words
Right.
that he used. And again, he's bit after 60 Minutes a big time because they talked about, they had interviews last week with all the people that, well, not all the people, but some of the people that were fired from federal agencies, including USAID. So that's pretty frightening when he's got
Very
the
frightening.
president's ear.
I think you should say that the piece was about his hypocrisy around the First Amendment.
That's right.
And that's what he was mad about. So we need to say that. This is all very scary. And then we have the Mississippi newspaper where the judge decided that, yeah, I'm going to side with the city council and some others saying they somehow should not have been able to print an op-ed that criticized the city government for a very obvious thing, not notifying the city and the press about an open meeting.
Which I've
So-
never heard of before. But you know, that leads on. Where'd you work? Did you work at a small place before you came here?
I was at the Boston Phoenix.
Okay, well, that's not a small place. But,
But
you
I
know-
was at the Daily Item of Lynn.
Okay,
before
perfect.
that.
That's
Yep,
what I'm asking. I
community
mean, you
newspaper
know, it's
company
one
before
thing
that.
for somebody to stand up.
That's right.
If you're at a major institution, you were at ABC, obviously, GBH kind of thing. You're at a small institution. You know that Donald Trump has more lawyers than there are humans willing to sue anybody, even if you know you're in the right. You can't just not show up in court. You have Elon Musk talking about long prison sentences for people. I mean, there is, even for the best intended journalists at smaller institutions, there's got to be a chilling effect of all this
Oh,
kind
absolutely.
of stuff, right?
Yeah. I would think. I mean, if you were at a small institution, the idea of going head to head, if you're at a network, if you're at the AP, you've got access to your own strong counsel, deep pocketed bosses. But yeah, if you're at a small institution,
So what do you say, the
running
small
afoul of this
institution
stuff-
sitting here, the editor's here and a young reporter who's nervous about what's going to happen if they say something that makes a Trumpster unhappy locally? What do you say to them?
What you say is there's a strength in numbers, and so we're back to how we began
The
this
AP story,
conversation,
yeah.
which is that everybody has to sign on and say, hey, that we have a First Amendment, and that works, and that protects us from this. And by the way, the Supreme Court has upheld. And by the way, I went back and found a piece from Politico in 2018 when they sued the first Trump administration for just these kinds of violations and accusations. And they cited in their piece a Seventh Circuit and a Second Circuit two opinions, which explicitly said an implied threat to, journalists in this way and journalism in this way is
Violative?
violating the First Amendment.
But as I
Yeah.
understand it,
Yeah.
there is no clear Supreme Court precedent saying that you have a right to access that can not be denied if the person providing access is not pleased with your speech. That's my non-attorney's understanding. As for what you would say to the hypothetical editor and reporter who might be worried about running afoul of the administration, Callie offered a much more uplifting take. I was going to say, you tell them cross your fingers, hope they don't
Exactly.
notice what you write or you say, because there's a whole bunch of ways they can make your life hellish, and all indications are they will.
Right.
It's our new
Well-
media segment. We're talking to Callie Crossley and Adam Reilly.
And it's worth pointing out that this is what happens. Viktor Orban in Hungary, it goes after the press. Vladimir Putin kills people who speak out for things he doesn't like. I mean, so
Just as an aside, that was
Right.
one of the things when we had J.D. Vance offering his pro-free speech lecture to European allies. I am eagerly waiting to see if a similar exhortation is delivered to the Putin regime. I don't think it's going to be, but I mean, you want to talk about egregious violations of free speech? Yeah, killing people for criticizing the government
Right.
is.
And by the way,
significantly
some of the folks from Germany responded and said, "Really? We don't do that here, like you do."
So can we go from small publications to huge publications? We all remember, I assume everybody in the audience does, the Washington Post and the LA Times, both the publishers, Bezos and the guy from the LA Times, Sun Xiang, killed editorials in their own newspapers supporting Harris. We took the term from Tim Snyder, anticipatory obedience, frightening at two huge institutions like that. Well, it hasn't stopped. Here is the publisher owner of the LA Times, Patrick Sun Xiang, on Dr. Drew Pinsky's podcast, not backing up his own reporter at the LA Times, Jacqueline Cosgrove is their name, for an unflattering article that they wrote about Pinsky. Here he is.
So I think you're right. The unfairness of, and that was supposed to be then a news report rather than an opinion. And
Yes, that's right.
And that's what I also think is wrong about media. You have to be fair, and that's all you ask, right? Fair and honest, and to call you on some of these things.
Talking about his own reporter at his own newspaper.
Yeah, that was really, really hard to watch. And just to fill people in who might not have seen
Please,
or heard this audio, this was Drew Pinsky, who I remember from, what was it, Love Lines? On,
Yeah.
back
in the
back
day.
in the day, back in the
Love
90s.
Lines, I missed that. Was that like a dating show?
It was like relationship-y,
Oh,
kind of
really?
geared
It
toward the
wasn't
male.
serious is the point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
How did you miss that?
No, but he
I did too.
was covered negatively in the LA Times when he was being eyed for a seat on this homeless commission or a board overseeing a homeless commission in Los Angeles. And his claim, which he made to the owner of the LA Times, was that he hadn't been contacted for comment. The
yeah.
article that was written about him, was completely inappropriate and a shoddy piece of work. And before those comments that we heard from the LA Times owner, you could see in the video of this interview, the LA Times owner just basically chortling along with this incredibly denigrating characterization of one of his own reporter's pieces of work. And it seems, by the way, the criticisms just aren't true, that Pinsky was in fact contacted.
Right, he
for
was
comment.
contacted.
And supposedly
Yeah.
quote all over the piece.
Right. He was quoted
Yeah.
and he was contacted, and they have all of the evidence of that. So here is the LA Times not even knowing what the evidence was and agreeing with Drew Pinsky, who was obviously just mad that he didn't get a favorable profile.
Well,
And
no,
they
I'm
also
sorry, go
talk.
ahead.
They also talk about what happened to this reporter, that she was called horrible names, harassed. She explained in an email to the company she'd been called these horrible names, and she listed them out. And she obviously is in fear after these people that like Pinsky went after her.
And I think, we should mention that right now in terms of the atmosphere right now in the context of all of this. And we're talking about what makes people think about how they're going to stand up at small or large. A number of journalists have been personally, threatened. We can name them. And so this is real for people.
By the way, that's an example. That's an example of the LA Times owner denigrating one particular report by one of his own staffers, but he's also going to be introducing, as some people may know, he's going to be introducing this thing he calls the bias meter.
Yeah.
And I'm a little unclear on whether it's going to be opinion pieces only or opinion and news pieces, but it's going to be AI driven and is allegedly going to tell you if you're reading something in the paper that he publishes, if what you're reading is inappropriately biased, which is about the most emphatic no confidence vote you can give to create a systemic device to call bias out in your own paper is, for LA Times staffers, it's incredibly offensive.
Can I do
And
another?
we should also note
Yeah,
that a
go
lot
ahead.
of people have resigned
Yeah.
their positions, not just there, but in
Well, a
other
lot of
places.
people resigned their
Yeah.
subscriptions too, like
Well,
250,000 from the
But
Washington
I'm talking about the
Post.
journalists.
Oh, I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
yes. I mean,
journalists.
journalists have
Right, they've
resigned.
left.
Yes, yeah.
But there's one more example of this. We mentioned the Washington Post and LA Times. The Washington Post, which also Bezos killed an editorial supporting Kamala Harris. Most recently, the ad people approved 2 full-page cover ads from Common Cause saying Elon Musk, I think, has to go. And all of a sudden, after approval, the thing was killed, and the assumption is it had to be killed by Jeff Bezos. So, Marjorie, this is directed to you, not just Adam and Callie. You always say to people when they call or text and say, I don't know who to trust in the media anymore. And you say, go to mainstream, responsible, legacy media. Well, the Washington Times and the LA Times fall into that
Washington
category.
Post.
The Washington Post, I'm sorry. And the LA Times. What do you say to them now?
New York Times.
Okay. I'm serious. What do you say?
What I say is I went to look at the policy, and the policy says we accept all types of advertising and do not decline ads unless there is a compelling reason to do so. The point here is that they will not say what their compelling reason was. The policy also says it reserves the right to position, revise, or refuse to publish any advertisement. And again, they still have not said why. So it's bizarre because Common Cause reached out to them several times saying, tell us why.
And what they were
Yeah.
denied, just to be clear for the audience, they were denied the ability to publish it on the outside of the paper,
Yeah.
but there was
A
going to be
wraparound
an
thing.
inside
Oh,
component
Right.
as well, which the Post was not rejecting. So it's nonsensical. It's even more nonsensical than it seems at first blush. I mean, the Times is a great source. I think you just got to take. You got to take every source right now with a grain of salt. There are still great reporters at the LA Times, the Washington Post, and other outlets where the higher ups might seem to be compromised or striking a more complicit note. I just think it makes sense. If you're going to be a responsible news consumer, keep an eye on what the people who are running the show are doing and the climate they're creating for their journalists to do the work.
But
they
you
do.
know what's incredible to step back and think about this for a minute? We've been talking about how a lot of GOP politicians privately will say one thing, but they won't say it publicly because they have death threats against them and their family, or they're worried about getting primaried. Then we were just talking about this with retired federal judge Nancy Gertner about judges being in the same place. Judges can get the federal marshals, but
Right.
that the judges who go against the president are subject to the same, the death threats and the intimidation, and reporters. And it's like this climate of intimidation. And normally, in a climate of intimidation, the leaders of whatever it is will come forward and say, there is no place for this. There is no place for this kind of harassment and threats of violence and scaring people, having to leave their homes. But no, Donald Trump is not saying that. Elon Musk is not saying that. No one is saying that. And so I don't know, what does this mean? Is this a signal to the January 6th people who are just freed from
Go
jail?
get them, you mean?
Well, I mean, it's
Well,
a
that was a
climate.
signal even before that.
It's a big
you know.
climate of intimidation,
Yeah.
is what it is, and hoping that everyone is too intimidated to do what they know is right. And I get that. I mean, it's scary.
It is.
Yeah, no, I would
Yeah,
say,
no.
I mean, I said those signals have been out there for a while now. That's not new. That's why a lot of
Well, I
our
don't think it's
fellow-
been to this level before. I think this is new. You don't think
It was pretty intense in the first administration. You can have chapter and verse of journalists who were
Yeah.
really under threat and had to figure out: do I stay in the business? Do I continue to do it? How do I protect myself? And these were people. Just again, they're not. President Trump isn't sitting in his office saying, "You go take care of this journalist." There are other people who would take on the task, feeling that they are supporting what the agenda is, and that's part of the agenda.
Yeah.
Who was his
So-
consigliere who testified against him? What was the name of his lawyer?
Michael Cohen.
Michael
Yes,
Cohen said
yeah.
he never had to say
Right.
explicitly what he wanted done. If you worked with Donald Trump, you knew exactly what he wanted done and to whom.
For what it's worth, though, as unpleasant as the environment is, I think the big goal is eradicating trust in
Right.
the mainstream
That
media,
is
and he's
correct.
doing that. There was a Gallup poll that came out last October, which showed that I think trust in the mass media is down to something like a 20-year low. 31% of the general public trusts the mass media. That's less people than trusted the Supreme Court at that point, less people than trusted Congress, the executive branch, and it shakes down by party. It's a little over 50% for Democrats. I think like 12% of Republicans trust the mass media. So that's the ultimate attainment for him, and he's getting.
We mentioned yesterday there was a story about how the vaccination rates in Massachusetts have gone down, and people are concerned about this from measles, mumps, rubella, COVID, the flu, and all this. And the Globe quoted this woman who said she just didn't trust vaccines anymore because she got the COVID vaccine and she got COVID. And I thought, oh my God, now she wasn't going to vaccinate her own children. I thought she wasn't getting that information except from some website somewhere online or some crazy thing.
Or from RFK Jr.'s
Right.
organization.
Or from
Yeah.
And so you think, I don't know, people were not very discerning, I guess.
Well, also, repetition works, and at every point, the president and others who feel the same way are repeating the kind
Yeah.
of non-facts that people absorb after a time. They hear it over and over again. It sounds like it's true. So then when you present them with evidence that this is not true, they're questioning you.
Yeah, there's specific claims, and then there's just the slogan or the motto, fake news, which has been repeated ad nauseum. It's
Or
ingrained
enemy of the people.
in fake news,
Right.
enemy of the people.
Yeah.
By the way, every time, before you guys go, every single time someone says, like you just said a second ago, Callie, we mentioned that where does this all come from? This repeat the lie. It's Roy Cohn. And it was done brilliantly in Michael Kirk's film, The Choice, when he focuses on both major candidates. It comes out election season. They're brilliant documentaries he does. It was the housing discrimination case where this all started, where Roy Cohn, most of you know him from the House Un-American Activities Committee, and Joe McCarthy. They lose this case for discriminating against black tenants, and they go out on the steps of the courthouse, I'm giving you the simplified version, and say they won. And Cohn's advice is just keep saying you won repeatedly, and at the end of the day, people are going to believe you won. And that was even before there was the Fox News and the Newsmax and the whatever. So the final question, we only literally have 20 seconds for each of you. Is the press able, even the best of the press that is fearless, competent, not doing all the, are they able to keep up with the incredible rate of the movement of this administration?
I think it's hard. There's just so much happening. Yeah, it's I'm not going to say a losing battle, but very difficult.
How about it, Callie Crossley?
I think what's happening, and I'm glad to see it, is they're moving from the headline stuff, which is pretty horrific, down to what's underneath. And that's where you really want to make sure that you're supporting your independent journalism, because
Indeed.
that's where you get the information.
It's great to see you both. Thanks so much for your time. We
That was
appreciate
our
it.
debut segment. What do you think? Thumbs up? I hope so.
Well, they were
Okay.
in it. It's pretty hard to say thumbs down.
Yeah, two
Yeah, Adam
huge
said
Okay,
thumbs
Jim.
down. That was
Would you
horrible.
like to say thumbs up, Jim?
I was enchanted.
Okay.
I was.
Enchanted,
I really
okay.
was. We'll do it again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you both. That was great.
GBH's Adam Reilly and Callie Crossley for our new Friday media analysis segment, Press Play.